We don't have any props this morning. Lights are on, basically.
Are we not props? Is that, we got these stools.
Will was like, should I bring a PowerPoint too? We'll put a PowerPoint basically that Will has online. But today's more of a conversation, and I wanted to introduce to Will Gregg. Let me just read off some key things over here. 11 years of experience basically from sales, product marketing, product development. Actually, graduated from Clemson and as an instrument-rated pilot, which is interesting. Dustin, so I came this morning and I asked basically, Dustin, so what's your title? He says, I'm an engineer. I said, it's really good when you get people.
Humility is one of our core values.
I was going to say, when anybody just says they're just an engineer, they've got to be really deep because everybody's like, oh, well, I'm so-and-so and so. Anyway, what I thought was fascinating was he actually has a bachelor's in microbiology and a master's in information assurance, got into software. And he's been heavily responsible for the product and updates and front end, back end, and designing the new database and that kind of thing, but we'll talk about that. So I think that how are we going to do this moving forward? This is kind of the start of something as we sort of pivot. I'd love to hear from basically Greer and Greer and Cooper basically about some of the challenges they face, bringing Boomtown up. So this is one of these conversations basically. Workiva today is a publicly traded company with a market cap this morning. The market suggests a little bit of 1.5 billion, based in Iowa. I'm always curious to see what they say, how they describe themselves. So Workiva's tagline is, "We help teams work smart." It's kind of interesting. Not a small enterprise, 1,300 employees. I was founded in 2008. So that's what I have. How are we going to do this? It's very informal. So we just said, okay, we're going to take 5 topics, 5 areas. Product market fit. Something near and dear to me because I get people to come in here and they've got this great idea and they start plugging away only to find out they wash out in about 6 months. So I think product market fit is the first thing where we're going to start. Then we're going to talk about basically scale. You keep hearing about MVP. Oh, just put something out there basically, but how do you really think about, if this thing actually hits, you're architecting for scale. The third thing basically is critical is if you don't have the right team, you're actually dead in the water when you start, you just don't know it. So basically, putting the right team together and is important. Fourth thing basically is just some of the business and operational issues. On the way to basically 1.5 billion, a lot of mistakes have been made, so let's not gloss over those. I actually am one of those guys who likes to know more about the bad stuff than the good stuff. I don't know, that's not a kind of a, hey, good to see you. I get straight to, what's not working here. And then the last thing is basically, more for, Dustin, and this is going to be both the technical and, you're looking at both technical and business as we kind of, is the issue of technical structure, and how do you ensure that the technical side is keeping up with the aspirations of the success of the business, the CEO. So having said that, basically, I'm going to let Will go with this product market fit about entrepreneurs who think they've got the next best thing, and then they kind of go into how do you know you have a product market fit. Well, good product in the fit. Now, how do you achieve it? And then basically talk about the strategy, basically in terms of how you pivot to get where you need to go, because obviously it's a big pivot. So we'll start off with that and go from there.
Okay, thanks, Ernest. So I guess before I start, just quick questions, just so I kind of know sort of the distribution of the audience. Who's mostly technical and kind of who's mostly business, or who just blurs the line all the time? Okay, all right, well, good. So I'm kind of that too. As Ernest mentioned, I was educated at Clemson, mechanical engineer, but have always had a strong desire to learn how to build software companies, and that's what led me to Workiva. There's a long story there. I do think it's important just to kind of point out, I guess for this group, just to kind of give you a little context before we talk about specifics, so you kind of understand what we're doing now and kind of what we've come from. So Workiva started 2008, our first product launch was 2010. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on, but 2016, what year are we in now, 18?
18, yeah.
So 17. So I've been with Workiva since 2010. So we at that point we had about 40 or so employees and 0 customers, and we were spending a lot of money. And so I got to experience what it was like to kind of be a part of that all the way through, going public. The interesting thing is a lot of what I learned in that process is to Ernest's earlier point, some of the mistakes that we made. And as a person who's kind of always been at the center of a lot of different parts of our business, kind of the hub with a lot of spokes, I would liaise between a lot of our different teams, our product marketing teams, our business teams, our EM team. And so I got some sort of unique perspective as to the operation of the business, and that led me to build the team that we have now here in Charleston. About 3 years ago, I'm native South Carolinian and wanted to come back to Charleston, called Ernest and said, hey, I want to move back to Charleston, I want to build my team there. And these two guys, Patrick and Dustin, Patrick came to us from Blackbot, and Dustin and I had worked together both at Workiva and at another kind of interim business. Dustin agreed to come back, which was really key because he was kind of a linchpin for making this whole thing work. But the goal of this team was actually to get back to being that sort of highly agile, business, technical, all kind of mashed into one room, because as you scale, you lose a lot of that, right? You end up with what we have. We have 300 people in CS, we have 400 engineers, and we have 180 salespeople, and it's really difficult to kind of unitize those teams in a way where they can continue to work with the same efficiency that a startup can work with. It's like almost impossible. It's what everybody wants. Every big company wants speed, but it's just like there's a fundamental equation, right? There's like a critical velocity that you can't pass at a certain scale. And so we're kind of this interesting experiment right now. I kind of shed all of the baggage that I had prior and said, I want to just start from scratch, and I want to build this team in Charleston. And what we're going to focus on is getting back into that really high pace, highly collaborative, super customer focused mode, and let's see what we can figure out. Let's go find some opportunities. And having sold for a long time and been in the field for a long time, there were obviously some seeds of opportunity kind of buried there, and which kind of leads into the topic, which is product market fit. And by the way, at any point during any of this, this is meant to be kind of casual and authentic and kind of open forum. So we can pause and answer questions whenever. But to me, there's kind of I tell these guys all the time, there's a single measure of product market fit, and that's, will a customer buy what it is you have, right? It's just not any more difficult than that. And I think where we start is it's a wandering path to get to like perfect fidelity on that. Like you never kind of start. There are some people I think that are just unbelievably visionary. Bezos would be one of those guys, and I kind of devour everything that he writes because of it, because he's had this long-term vision, all the way back since 96 or whatever when he moved out to San Francisco, and he never really kind of wavered from it. I mean, he learned a lot of things along the way, and if you read like his letters to shareholders, they're really fascinating, the things he kind of highlights each year. But generally, that's not how it works. Generally, what happens is you find a thread of an opportunity, and you tug at the thread, and if it's loose and you pull it out, you throw it away, and you go find another thread, right? Eventually, you're going to find that one that starts to unravel the sweater, and you just keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and you just realize there's more and more and more opportunity. And so when we look at things, I think the first thing we look at is if we killed it, if we nailed this space, if we execute flawlessly, what's our opportunity look like, right? And is it big enough to warrant investing in the space in the first place? Because total addressable market, speaking from someone with experience in a big company, that shrinks really fast, right? And the relative size of total addressable market shrinks astonishingly fast as you grow, right? So when you start and you're young and you're 5 people and you go, that's a $100 million market. Well, that's great if your aspiration is to be a $20 million company. You probably have lots of runway there to grow. If it's a $100 million market and you want to be a $1 billion company, you better have a couple more closely following, right? Or you better attack something that's got a lot of breadth out of the get-go. A lot of people will say, Bezos is one of those guys that will say, markets with unlimited TAM are amazing, right? With like sort of unlimited ability to expand. But I also think they're really uncommon and rare. So, I think the more likely scenario is that you find kind of what we had. I mean, what we started with, just to give you some specifics with this team is, we knew our platform is mostly a collaborative document platform. We link data. We do some other really interesting things, and you can learn all about it on our website, or we'll be happy to talk to you about it afterwards. But one of the things that we lacked for a lot of our clients was the ability to manage some of more of their data-centric challenges, right? So essentially everything that ends up in our software starts in some raw form in an ERP or CRM or an HCM or some transactional system or system of record. That data then sort of gets distilled. I like bourbon, so I always use the distillation analogy, but it goes through that condensation loop, and then what drips out is opportunity, right? So I think for us, trying to find those areas, we started with this kind of seed of an idea, iterated on it for a little while, but ultimately that what we're trying to get our customers to is a better way to build that distillation loop in Workiva, if that makes sense, right? Because what our platform had been prior to that had expected bourbon, right? Give me all the stuff that's ready to report. We'll report on it. And so that's it. That's all we had, right? It wasn't really any more concrete than that. We had a prototype that Dustin and one of our product managers and myself had kind of hacked together years ago that was sort of a proof of concept. And it was just a system to handle really, really huge volumes of scale performantly, because a lot of the stuff we were getting was transactional in nature. So it was just enumerated records and lots of those. So that's where we started. We put together a prototype, and part of, I think, doing this efficiently is about you invest the minimum amount necessary just to figure out the answer to the question you're trying to get the answer to, right? So it's the first question was, does this have any merit whatsoever? Does this idea, is there value in it? Is it interesting? Do people care about it? People are willing to spend money on it? Because you don't have a business if you don't have those fundamental things. And is it a problem we've defined, or is it a problem that customers have defined, right? Because I think sometimes you get wrapped up into the psychology of creating your own problems and then assuming that they exist in the wild, and they don't. And then you find that out sometimes catastrophically when you can't sell the thing that you built, right? So it's about kind of trying to iterate to some opportunity. So it was kind of fascinating. We had just stood up the team. We had our user conference, which is about 1,800 people. This speaking engagement is substantially less intense than the last one, which was a keynote presentation for about 2,200 people at our user conference a couple months ago. But we'd hired Patrick just before that, and so we were just got an office space. Dustin hadn't even moved. Dustin's an Iowa native, hadn't moved to South Carolina yet. So he's remote. It was me and Pat sitting in that office together for the first couple months, and we had 3 weeks to get ready for user conference. And the question was, what do we want to do for user conference? We got 3 weeks. We better do something. Here's a chance to get in front of 1,800 customers all at once. Why would we not take advantage of that opportunity? So Pat learned some quick prototyping software that he'd never used before, hacked together a prototype, and then 3 weeks later we took that thing to our user conference and shopped it with a bunch of customers. And it's hard to say that was a smashing success, because that would be completely inaccurate. But again, it's about tugging at the thread, right? We tugged at that thread, and it had traction, right? It had grip. There was something more there. It's like, okay, well, this is the thread we need to continue to tug at. So we went from that prototype. That gave me sort of enough validation. I think about everything in terms of what's our outlay, what's our return, right? When you build SaaS businesses, and by the way, everything we talk about today, for the most part, is B2B SaaS, right? If you're a consumer-based business, I'd love to help you. I probably have very little valuable insight for you. Or if you're anything other than SaaS, that's a different model too. In SaaS, you build for growth. That's just the way it works, and it's expensive because you essentially are betting on the fact that your operational revenue, right, that recurrent revenue you're going to get from that SaaS model, which is greatly reduced from the capital expense that people used to spend on software, is going to make up the difference over time, because it's going to be annuity-based versus kind of one hit, right? So I go sell a capital deal for $2 million, that's great, but if I get 10 or 20 customers that are paying me $100,000 a year, that's way better, because as long as I retain those customers, that revenue compounds over time, and my valuations compound over time. So it's about trying to get that enough validation that you're willing to make that spend. And so our first spend was really just, I think of our team as, I went to our EM team. My boss is our CEO, Marty Vanderplow. He's a really exceptional guy, a great, fantastic leader. We've both learned a tremendous amount from him. But when I originally pitched this idea, I essentially went after it just like I would a startup, right? Which is, hey, I need about $1.5 million worth of capital. I'm going to build this team. We're going to operate for a year. Here's what we're going to get done in a year, right? Here's how we know if we're successful at the end of 12 months or at the end of 6 months. And for us, it was pretty simple. We had a revenue objective for the back half of 2018. So what does that mean? It means we have to launch in the first half of 2018 because we need 6 months of selling runway because our sales cycles might be 90 to 120 days. So if we're going to do anything material in 2018, we better start in the first half. So now we're starting to kind of create some constraints for ourselves, right? So we know product has to launch in essentially 9 months is what we had to build it. It has to be scoped in terms of what could be built by 2 people fundamentally, because at the time all we had was Patrick on front end and Dustin on back end, which was an astonishing accomplishment. I mean, it's production software that, our customers are 75+% of the Fortune 500, right? So these are big customers. They're big banks. They're the largest banks in the world. They're the largest insurance companies in the world. They don't really tolerate mistakes. And so building software for that audience that quick is really, really difficult. But these guys stepped up to plate and got it done. And so I think, that initial investment was just, we're going to take this money. This is what we're going to produce. At the end of this period of time, we should have some paying customers, right? Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5, and we should be generating somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 300,000 in recurrent S&S. That's how we know if we're successful. So, software and subscription and support. If I use S&S, that's what we mean. And lo and behold, we just signed our 6th customer yesterday, 7th soon, and we're just past the 1 year mark. We went to GA in July. And so now where we are is in this kind of next phase of product market fit, which is the thing that we built is sellable. We know that. We know that it has the value that we expect to get out of it because our average deal size is where we expect it to be. Now the question is, how much of the TAM that we see can we legitimately address, right? So, hey, there's a $1 billion market here for these data tools. Yeah, but with our tool set, what part of that $1 billion TAM do we legitimately have access to? And that's generally a small subset based on some handicaps that you get along the way, sophistication of your software, your feature depth, and all those things. And so now where we are is we see this opportunity. We know there's money there, and now we just start to iterate, right? Like for those of you that are engineers, I always think about like the numerical methods, like that. Like Newton-Raphson, that one always sticks in my head because it's a really sloppy convergence method. But it's like, here's a line. I'm going to guess on the high side. Did I cross the line? Okay, then reverse the direction of my guess. Did I cross it again? Okay, then reverse the direction of my guess. It's no more complicated than that. The point is, you're taking the zigzagging path, and you're constantly crossing through that optimum line. But eventually, that thing converges on that line, and you find it, and you get really, really tight. And that's when you see that really exceptional rampant growth, right? So for us, that was, not this team specifically, but we'll see that, I think. I think we're going to see that in mid-2019 with this group. But with Workiva, we saw that, in probably 2010. I like the natural frequency analogy, too, because, again, as an engineer, that's kind of a fascinating phenomenon, right? I excite something, and it has a natural damping effect, right? But then I excite it at just the right frequency, and all of a sudden, I get an exponential response, right? It's a really bad thing in machines because it causes them to blow up, but it's a really neat thing in other ways. It's like when you sing into a glass and the glass breaks. That's what's going on. And I think of products like that too, right? You'll know when you've hit that resonant frequency because it's different. It's way different. Like we went from, hey, we're going to battle for 3, 4, 5 customers a quarter to now we're signing 200 customers a quarter. I think we got it, right? I think we found the fit.
This new product that you'll brought to market, the team built over here, are we selling to existing customers, or are we picking up some new customers, basically?
So it's a little bit of both. It's kind of interesting. So our distribution has changed over time too. So we're a direct sales force. We do have some partnerships, but there's very little of our revenue that's attributed to partnerships right now. Obviously, that's something that we aspire to grow. but we have a direct sales team, and direct sales teams are they're really good in a lot of ways. They're new customer acquisition machines. They're really expensive, so there's some downside to them too. But we have an amazing breadth of customers at this point. Like, one of the things that's been interesting about our business is, if you look at a lot of big SaaS companies, they get to $1 billion valuation with less than 200 customers sometimes, because their average deal sizes are $500, $700 million. Workday's a great example of that, right? They have big deals, fewer customers. We had such a convergent product in that one space, and that, if I'm a public company and I have to file with the SEC, that's a big audience of people. Not all of that was addressable to us. There's 10,000 plus filers, a lot of which aren't going to spend the money on our software because it's not as painful for them because they're smaller, or they can outsource it or whatever. But there's about 3,300 of them that work with us. So we have an incredibly rich base of customers. Our problem is not customer volume right now. It's revenue per customer. So that's a long-winded way to answer your question, but I want to give you some context. So we're actually we're selling to existing customers in name, right? In practice, what that means is we're calling on brand new audiences, and we're hoping to get some goodwill from our existing relationship with the organization, but sometimes we don't, right? So we have to treat them as if they're net new, even if we have an existing relationship with them, if that makes sense.
What about the scale side of the...
So I think Will, he said, 2019 is going to be a time to innovate. That is true. It's also a time for us to do some backfill. Obviously, when we release a product GA in 9 months, we took some shortcuts. So now is our time to go back and sort of fill some of that stuff in. When I joined Workiva in 2012, we're sort of that same position. So I joined early 2012. We're on the really steep part of that growth curve, where we were an app engine shop with people who'd never worked with NoSQL databases before, writing Python with a group that only wrote C# and Java previously in their lives. Learned a lot of valuable lessons there. We had a lot of monkey patching going on because you could do it in Python, which turns out to be a disaster. Don't ever do that. And but what you do, and this is part of my role there, is you make those certain sacrifices at that time that will not kill you later on. Unfortunately, at that time, part of the mistakes that we learned, it's nice to have some experience in what you're using, because even though the data store is sort of infinitely scalable, people didn't know how to model their data correctly, and that some of those decisions ended up biting us later anyway. But you just try to make those decisions as wise as you can. You're never going to make a perfect decision. You're never going to have the perfect code. I was writing code last night, and I was going back to code I've already written and looking at it saying, I'm really unhappy with that, but it works. And so you just try to make those decisions as best you can, knowing that you're going to have to correct some of those things later on. An easy example, like we use a SQL database now as opposed to the data store, but you try to avoid certain relationships and queries that are too heavily dependent on joins. So later on, I know it wouldn't be too much for me to go use a NoSQL database out there. It just, that's really turns into more like an art, I would say, than a science. And that's sort of how we've been structuring the team and working on the product so far.
That question, either one of you can answer, probably maybe more for Dustin. How do you balance your choice of methodologies with the business side of things? Because you can obviously take and run down one path that, everybody's saying you need to do DevOps, everybody's saying you need to do full stack, right? And how do you make that balance and that choice based on your team and kind of the business model that you guys are trying to pursue?
That's a good one. So I'm gonna rewind here back to 2012 and to get to the actual root of your question.
That's fine.
When I joined, we were as an organization, it was really fun as an engineer. It was fun as an engineer because we have a fairly large CS organization. We call it customer success, but it's really like customer support. We worked heavily closely with that group, and they would actually be talking to customers, and we would have meetings, and they would talk to the engineers, and we would say, okay, based on immediate customer feedback, what are the next things the engineers need to work with? And at this time, we weren't really that heavy into a formal sort of agile Scrum process or anything like that. We talked to CS, And CS sort of gave us some direction, and presumably there are other meetings with engineering management to get sort of.
Sorry, quick sidebar.
Yep.
This is 2012 we're talking about.
Yep.
2012, we're about $100 million revenue company, and still pretty absent formal process. Just for context. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So anyway, as we grow as a company, we get a new building, right? So there's a lot more money. We're talking 2013, 2014. With more money,
14 we IPO'd.
14
We got precisely $93 million in cash, and
with more money, the structures become more formal. 2013, I'm going to a meeting that all engineers had to go to where we had to do or meet with a Scrum consultant. And we started introducing Jira and Scrum everywhere into our process. Next thing you know, 2015, 2016, I'm working on a brand new product. I never talk to customers anymore. Like, it's just something that never happens. 2015, 2016, 2017, we're not really releasing because to me, it's all a computer science problem at that point. Right? It's not a product problem anymore. Then I moved down here with Will, and all of a sudden I'm thrown back into this mix of talking to customers, and I think that has been a really positive experience as an engineer. Will didn't really mention this, but Patrick and myself, we've gone out to customer meetings. We've been in New York. We've seen their pain. We sort of have a better understanding of what they're actually dealing with. I think that's been really good for our methodology because what it does is it focuses, the need for revenue and understanding how much you cost and how much money you need to survive. That really sort of thins the mist on all the rest of the process stuff we've been going through. And so now, when it comes to like DevOps and all those things, I'm laser focused on just getting things to production at this point. And when it comes to DevOps, luckily we have a part of the team that handles most of that for us. If I was a startup, and I know like things like Kubernetes are really hot right now. The fact that the side venture that I had left with last year was a consulting company that helped other large companies sort of move to the Google ecosystem. And every time we had a company come to us and say, we're trying to run Kubernetes, don't do it. Just use App Engine. App Engine Flex or Elastic Beanstalk or something. Try to keep your process as simple as possible. But I think the trap that engineers fall into is they think their job is not to produce value, it's to produce complexity. Because they think it makes them smart, right? They think that that's their value. It's really not. But it's easy for engineers to fall into that trap because they get separated from the business. They get separated from the customers. So this has been really nice.
Can you talk a little bit about, I'm assuming as you went from engineering CS-led development to product development, Scrum teams, there's a change in culture, right?
Yeah.
I'm also assuming that you had some churn on the engineering side. So how did you maintain that company feel with some people leaving, attrition, and then new blood coming in?
we didn't really have a lot of attrition.
No,
Wow,
we didn't.
that's amazing.
I mean, our engineering culture. I think our culture in general is a pretty neat place to work. I mean, we could talk more about that later, but we didn't suffer churn, fortunately.
Yeah.
That's great.
We didn't suffer churn. I think what you saw, and this is honestly back to the original point, what you saw was that disconnect between engineers and the customers. And so we introduced what I like to call contrived complexity. So our product problems turned into computer science problems that engineers toiled on. That ended up being our real problem, but that's fun for engineers.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't see churn.
Delivery.
So you don't complain about it,
Yeah,
right?
we don't complain about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'd also say, from my perspective too, at least the way I run the team here is, the anecdotal story. I've got a good friend of mine is not in software, but is fascinated by software, and so he always wants to pick my brain on all these software topics. And it's funny, we always have this conversation because he'll ask me these questions. Well, how would you do so and so? Trey, I don't know. I don't have the handbook. There isn't a handbook for this, right? When you build companies, every company's personal. Every one of them's a little unique. Everything about how you go to market, how you build your products, how you deliver those products, is and should be unique to your company. It should have your thumbprint on it at some level. And so there's this kind of mythology, I think, and especially like in Silicon Valley, and because I know a lot of those guys, that if you just follow the handbook, everything will work out great, right? If you just implement this process, you'll be great. If you just do this thing, you'll be successful. And it's just not true, right? Building these companies it's intelligence, It's hard work, it's thoughtfulness, it's, accountability and responsibility, it's luck and serendipity, right? I mean, those are just all the things that have to happen and intersect to be really, really successful. And I think you can build $50 million businesses all day long, but if you really have a meteoric success, you can't really look in the mirror and say, I did all that, right? It's just nobody can do that with any kind of humility and say, we're 100% responsible for this. I think you always look in the mirror and you go, geez, I'm so glad we made this decision or this decision. I'm so glad we were lucky here and here, and man, it all just worked out. And I think there's a little bit of that in every company. So kind of circling back to your question about process, the way I think about process is the servant of outcome, right? Process for the sake of process is useless and expensive, right? And so I'm not going to implement a process because someone else tells me I should. I'm going to implement a process because we need a process at that time for our business operations and our technical operations to function well. So it's that just-in-time process, the just-in-time maturity, right? We think about the way we build our culture and organization the same way. So I only do that thing I need to do right when it's required, because generally if you implement it before that, it's destructive to your culture. I mean...
Yeah, and you were talking about dev processes and practices, I think you said as well. So I would kind of draw a difference between the two. There's process, which is how you do things, and practices, which I kind of I conflate that with what you have available to you in an organization. So we're lucky in the fact that we're a small group within Workiva that has a large dev organization around it. So when we did our rapid prototyping, when we got from zero to product really quickly, we could build on a front-end UI framework. We could build on the fact that we have a deployment team. So we tried not to focus on the processes that didn't help us get things out quickly, but we begged, borrowed, and stole everything we could from the larger organization that helped us get out quickly. So we were not writing, at least on the front end, I was not writing a lot from scratch. I was not coming up with fancy new UI components. I was being bland, and I was being very much focused on the workflow of getting how to solve the customer problem as quickly as possible, where I didn't have to write as much custom code as possible. I wanted to use puzzle pieces and put stuff together. So I think that's also, we used it from the larger organization, but as Dustin was saying before, if you can use it from open source software, from things you can buy off the shelf, like not using hand-rolling your own Kubernetes stuff, using App Engine and all those things that where you can rapidly develop without worrying about infrastructure or toiling on something that's not your mission, right? Like your mission is the features you give to a customer that gets you money that they're willing to pay for. It's not building all the underlying infrastructure and maintaining that yourself. So anytime you can borrow those practices or processes from someone else that helps you, do it.
Yeah, innovate only when you need to innovate.
Yeah.
Right. Borrow whenever you can borrow. I mean, that's kind of another. Again, people could probably interpret the sort of the Bezos manifesto one of two ways, right? Like you could say, well, they built a bunch of infrastructure and they made a bunch of money at it. That's true, but from his perspective, they built only the infrastructure they needed when they needed it, because infrastructure is incredibly expensive to build. Unfortunately, we live in a time where you can stand up a company on a laptop in a garage in a half hour using, hosted services, and that's amazing. I mean, the reason people are in Silicon Valley is because that's where all the chip manufacturers were, and you had to run all this stuff on boxes, and that doesn't exist anymore. So there's a freedom and lack of expense. I mean, the cost of starting a company has gone to effectively zero. I mean,
You can probably get a product through prototyping into production inside of Google's free tier if you really want to.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Let's, I think Katie had said before there, basically in terms of the team. So let's talk about basically, selecting the team, what do you guys look for, and then how do you preserve, the team. It's kind of interesting. So it's almost like a microculture when you guys are creating within the bigger.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the company sees that too. It's kind of interesting as we're in this odd position because I've been around forever. And Dustin's been around for a long time. We know a lot of people in the company, and we've earned a lot of respect in the company over the years. But what we're doing now is testing some of those relationships, right? Because we're doing some things that may challenge, kind of standing points of view and things like that. I think from a team perspective, that kind of builds into the team. I can give you kind of the macro view of what what I kind of look for in kind of building the structure and culture that I think scales well. And then Dustin can maybe, and Pat and even Chris can speak maybe to the more granular details on kind of the skills. But for me, it's pretty simple. Like I like people, I do all of our initial interviews, and probably will do that until I can't do it anymore because it's just not feasible. Because I'm looking for some really core character things, right? I want people who are just fundamentally driven and love challenge and just are tenacious about solving challenges, right? And there's a kind of a personality type. Somebody like that can become anything, right? I mean, somebody with the capacity to learn, the humility, drive. I mean, those people can become just remarkable engineers. They can become remarkable leaders. They can become anything. And so those are kind of the core traits I look for. But then I also look for some diversity in the mix of who we have, because those different points of view lead to generally much more well-informed opinions. To give you some sense of how we did that with this group, two of the guys who are not here, Dylan Jenkins and Michael Cox, are our two product managers. Dylan and Mike have worked for me for years, and so when I came to do this team, I had a much larger team that we had to kind of figure out how to filter into the rest of the organization in a smart way to where they were fulfilled and had good opportunity, and that they were that could continue to support kind of Workiva's mission, because I had to kind of clean sheet this thing. And so those two guys had demonstrated that I put them in super ambiguous situations and gave them some broad objectives, and they just always rose to the occasion. They could figure it out, right? It's like, for me, it's about trust people, give them a mission, hold them accountable, right? And give them the opportunity to fail too, by the way, because if those first three things are true, you can't punish people for failure. You have to just accept it as a fact. Fail fast, fail cheap, move on, right? It's just the way it is. So I think I look for people that embrace that kind of culture, that are comfortable with ambiguity. We have I think a fairly fun culture. We have a super interesting mix of personalities between the group, which I think is always good. And but to me, it's like that core team. Those people have to function really well together inside and outside of work, because building companies, building teams, building everything else is massively stressful, and personal relationships are generally what get you through that stress, right? They're generally what help you kind of navigate through that.
So from a technical perspective, I always like to throw this out. The best employee I ever had, or ever was sort of under me at Workiva, present company excluded, or anybody I work with, was he was an intern. He was 14 years old when we hired him. His name was Alex. Now this guy, obviously, he doesn't fit a traditional resume. He doesn't come in and say, I've got 10 years of Java or Python experience or anything like that. He's 14. His mom drove him to work every day. He's on work permit. But the kid, it's not fair to call him a kid now, he's 20. Alex, due to the way he was raised, I'm assuming he was homeschooled, he wasn't institutionalized. So I would say, Alex, at this time we're working on this spreadsheet product. I need something that can parse formulas and give me an AST, or syntax tree, so it can parse out these complex formulas and give me an object I can actually manipulate memory. He says, okay, that's the instruction I gave him. Alex, this is what I need. He comes to me, it was like 2 weeks later, he implemented the first one in Go. At this time we were writing Google Go. The first one that I'm aware of, it's a recursive descent parser, generic recursive descent parser in Go. Now all the implementations of parsers in Go was a copy of something that I think it was Russ Cox had written, showing how to use channels. And if you're familiar with Go, it's their traditional stuff. But anyway, he innovated on his own. He went out, he did the research, and he provided me a working product in 2 weeks. Right? He didn't come to me every day and ask me how to do things. He was a problem solver. He wasn't somebody who needed micromanaging. He's 14 at the time. He was probably the best employee, because I don't necessarily, my undergrad degree is in microbiology. I'm not a traditional CS person. I don't care really how many years of experience you have. Now, if you put that you're an expert on something on your resume, expect that I'm going to ask you those questions, right, to see if you're lying. But really, what I'm really looking for is somebody who doesn't need to be micromanaged. Who I can just say, sort of Will's point, this is what I'm expecting you to do. If you can't solve something, I'm not you know, even if my title's better, it doesn't mean I know everything. It just means I've been here longer, really. I may have seen something that you haven't, but there's a possibility, a strong one, that I have not seen that problem before. So instead of just coming to me, you know, sort of like a child asking what to do next, why don't you come to me with some options? You know, why don't you with some available paths forward? And that's really what I'm looking for: self-starter, problem solver. And that's, to me, that is the most valuable skill that you can come to work with.
It's fair to caveat that, though, with the scope of that responsibility obviously depends on the level of experience and skill, right? So we don't expect that out of every single person that we hire, but you better bet the core team we build of future leaders are going to, you know, have those characteristics, because those are the people we're expecting to proliferate and be the contagion of our culture, right? The affect everybody that comes into the company after that, and so maintenance of that culture and that idea is really important. So
especially in a startup, you don't have time for that, right? When you're trying to produce that product, you just need people solving problems.
yeah, and I mean, again, I'll say another key characteristic of that is, like, people can't be afraid to fail if you give them that level of responsibility and accountability, right? Okay, you got to go accomplish this abstract task. You don't know how to do it, and frankly, I don't know how to do it, and so we both may fail, and that's totally okay, right? Let's just fail fastly, fail cheaply, right? But I think a lot of times people don't. There's inaction because of fear of failure, fear of consequence, and it's like I'd much rather make a bad decision fast than a bad decision slow, because then at least we can unwind it. There's this another kind of a Bezosism, but there's a couple different takes on this idea, but he has this concept of like there's two types of doors. There's a one-way door and a two-way door. Like the door swings one way, or, you know, kind of opens and shuts one way, or it kind of swings in both directions. And what he'll say is like on the two-door decisions, just make them fast, because they're easy to unwind, right? If it's reversible, just move fast. Don't worry about it, because you can always unwind it if you make a mistake. And I would say that 80% of the decisions in a startup, and as you're scaling a business, pre and post public company, are absolutely decisions that can be easily unwound if they're smartly designed, right? So we want to go do this thing. Okay, let's do it in this way such that we can learn what we need to learn, but also not have a catastrophic failure that's really expensive to the company if it doesn't work out the way that we expect or hope it will. Then the one-way decisions are the ones where you've got to be very contemplative, right? Those are like major architectural decisions where we're going to do a thing now that's going to impede us in 3 years if we're not smart about it, right? Those are decisions that have to be thoughtful, contemplative, you know, because they're not easily unwound and they can hurt you for years. I mean, this isn't all about what we've done well. We've made some huge mistakes. Business-wise, technologically-wise, structuring our teams, doing all sorts of things, and that's just the nature of building companies. And but I think, you know, where we've gotten to is you know,
The biggest mistake that we make, and I think a lot of people made, is the sunk cost fallacy.
yeah,
Fell for that one on a couple projects. The sunk cost fallacy. And we're still in the middle, in my opinion, of some of those items. Nobody time boxed things, nobody money boxed things. So they just turn into these money pits, and you're 3 years down the line, well, we built it, we have to continue with this process,
Yeah.
and we have to use it.
we have to monetize the thing we built,
Yeah.
rather than, well, no, you don't. I mean, sometimes it's less expensive to just throw it away and grab something off the shelf, right?
So that honestly, I would just be ruthless. And I know one of the reasons we don't kill these projects now is because we fear it's going to hurt the engineers involved. You can't run a business like that. So engineers, they're big boys or big girls, right? They're gonna get over it okay. But I think that's a hard lesson to learn as well, is being willing to be ruthless to some degree about those decisions.
So one of the things that specifically that we've seen here, and I've kind of watched it since we were launched, but really started paying attention from 2006 forward, is that as companies grew and went through all the gyrations and became a little corporate and all that, you had a lot of, my phone, and I always knew when somebody was ready.
They're frustrated.
I get these calls, there's frustration, there's...
I got handcuffs on. It's terrible.
The gyrations are just like, I'm thinking, at the early stage, there's so many gyrations, for me, no day is ever the same. So I've got to be very careful who's around me, because it's very unsettling. It's unsettling to me. I don't sleep all the night, so I can't imagine, what it's like for people around me. But I've seen some of these software companies, and typically when you get between 50 and 100 employees, they're just dropping off the boat like rats. You know, they'll connect you to the mothership, so.
It's the hardest thing to
it's,
scale.
So I'm just curious, basically, can you speak to that? How do you keep people focused on the prize as you're going through some of this stuff? And is it just, from a business standpoint, or is this just the natural trajectory? You know, you're gonna lose, that kind of thing. So I'm just curious, can you speak to that a little bit?
So I have a business perspective on it. I'm sure you have a technical perspective on it. That's a really good question. So the first thing is, I think, this is a hypothesis, I don't know this, right? But what I find to be true, and what I have found to be true in many years operating in businesses, not just this one, but others, is that mostly what good people value is just authenticity, right? They just want to know, they want predictability and authenticity. You do what you say what you do. We know where the company's going. We don't, and I think what you see a lot of times is kind of a misstep in that growth stage where probably not even intentionally, there's this obfuscation of leadership from, the teams that do it. A lot of that is, again, just the natural, because they're scaling, because when you're an executive running a company that's, scaling $10 million, $20 million, $30 million a year, $100 million a year, that's super stressful and you're super focused. And so maybe what happens is you lose focus on kind of the clarity, the authenticity, the openness of the company. And I think one of the things that attracts, I know this for a couple of reasons. One is because it's the thing I'm attracted to about Workiva and always have been. And this comes directly from Marty. I mean, he is the representation of that culture, which I think is the most important thing. And then those of us who are stewards of that culture have to function in similar ways. But it's a transparency, right? And so I think what most people would tell you about Workiva, even still, when we do surveys, and we have 1,300 people, is we know again, not all the time, I'm not saying we're perfect at this, but most of the time people will say, we feel good about our trajectory, we understand our trajectory, we know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we feel like that the leadership is transparent, right? We know why we're doing what we're doing. And to me, it's a lack of transparency, I think, that causes people to feel that sense of being disenfranchised, right? Or because when you start and you're 5 or 10 people, everyone is involved in every decision. And so the first thing is just establishing that is not a scalable model, right? So I know we all love being involved in every decision, and I know, like, in our team, we still have meetings where, there's me and Dustin and Patrick and Chris and David and Dylan and Mike, and there's all of us in a meeting making a decision. That doesn't scale. It's great for now. It's really important for now because it helps us kind of proliferate our culture, our decision making, get those principles established. But over time, we're going to need ways to kind of unitize and modularize that decision making process and that ownership. And so lack of ownership and lack of transparency, to me, are the two biggest causes for people to be looking for jobs elsewhere, right? Because, those two things generally signal some sort of lack of fulfillment in what you do, right? Or, lack of feeling that you can have achievement doing what you're doing. So I think one of the things we haven't figured it out yet, by the way. We're still iterating around it, but the way I think about how to build sustainable, scalable businesses is you have to modularize that accountability and decision making in a way that it all fits together. Like, so in the software world, we do that with like microservices and APIs and contracts, and we know, hey, you're responsible for this unit of work, I'm responsible for this unit of work, but because we've already agreed this is how our two services are going to talk, you can go do your thing and make your decisions, and I can go do my thing and make my decisions. And that's the only way to scale a company. Like, if you can't at least get that at some level, you're never going to grow past about 20 or 30 people.
So, Ernest, I know you said earlier you're always looking for the bad stuff, so I'm assuming you're an engineer. And I'm on camera here, but I'm still going to be brutally honest about this. My perspective is a bit different because my time at Workiva has been mostly as an engineer, obviously. So my perspective, there wasn't necessarily at that level a great deal of transparency around what was happening. We still didn't have much turnover simply because Workiva is still a great place to work. So you still have like all those fringe benefits that people love. You got the gym, the cafeteria, all those things that engineers are going to love. It was really fun in the early days because the engineers, I think there's a misconception that engineers don't like people, introverts. Yeah, it's probably true that mostly engineers are introverts, but we still like seeing happy customers. We still like seeing the revenue numbers creep up every quarter. We're not totally disconnected from what it is to be, in business. So that was really fun. Then as we grew and we started adding more of that process, then that stuff sort of drifted away. And I think to some degree, the way that our organization felt that they were going to retain the top talent is to let them work on what they want to work on, which is not a very successful. It keeps your engineers, but it doesn't produce much business value.
I think Google found that out.
It's a bit self-defeating. The difference is Google has like $37 billion a year that they can just throw away, and we don't.
And so, from an engineer's perspective, it's still not a bad place to work because you're still going to work on fun things, even if those fun things aren't producing much value. So there really wasn't much turnover. Now, at some point, you grow to a level, you get to a point, and this is where I did when I had my side venture. Because okay, I can see now. This thing is fun, but it's not producing much value. I want to actually see what it's like to build a successful company, not solve a fun computer science problem. Then I obviously had the opportunity to come here, and this is doing exactly what I want to do, which is building software and to actually see it get sold and produce revenue and cover my costs and hopefully produce a profit, provide a lot of growth, get the stock price up, all those things, right? So that's been a lot of fun, and I think that really most of the engineers at the company, if given that opportunity, would take it. That's the unfortunate thing, and that's why I hope that what we're doing sort of spreads throughout the rest of the company. Is it's okay to involve the engineers in these business decisions. They don't have to be just monkeys sitting in a room somewhere, who we occasionally give instructions to and expect some product out of.
And arguably, I think there's a cultural qualification too, right? Which is if you don't care about the business, we probably don't really want you, right? I mean, if you want to go do academic things, go be in a university setting, right? Go work for a research company. We're not that. We're a product company. Our customers count on us to deliver them value. In fact, they pay us every year expecting that we're going to keep improving our product and delivering value. And that's our obligation to them, right? So if that doesn't excite you, if putting compelling software in customers' hands and seeing how you solve their problems doesn't excite you, you're not a good fit for us, right? I mean, that's kind of the nature. And I don't know that we've always, to Dustin's point, had the discipline to kind of call a spade on that, right?
We're bumping up on time, so 5 minutes, basically 0 to 1.5 billion. What are the 5 things you wouldn't do? That you learned, basically.
Oh my God! Only 5?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's more, but I think for this crowd, basically, it's like.
I've got one major technical thing.
Go, because I'm still thinking. I don't know how to pare that list down.
Dude, as tempting as it is, especially because it's fun and it's computer sciencey, and you're gonna get publications and you're gonna make blog posts, do not build your own database. Do not do it. I know there's a lot of fun problems there. Don't do it.
Even if you can afford to do it, don't do it.
Just do not do it. Use SQL, use data store, if the problem doesn't fit in that sphere, don't build it. It's not worth building. That would be my one major.
To me, I think the first mistake is don't lose focus on your customers, because that seems trivial until you start scaling really fast, and then there's so many things flying by in your periphery. It seems incredibly obvious, but it's not easy to do. Like the execution of that is very difficult because again, you have more people, they don't talk as much, they're not as connected to customers, so it gets harder to maintain. I think probably what I said earlier, which is don't implement process unless process serves some outcome, right? So don't feel the need to be Agile Scrum and to have delivery managers and to have QA people and have all of that structure unless you need that structure. Some companies, you may be able to scale. I mean, like in our case, we scaled to well over $100 million in revenue without a lot of process. And arguably, there's still some things that we do where we don't have a tremendous amount of process even at our scale. And sometimes it's really good, right? I mean, sometimes it's bad, but the process is constraining necessarily, and you. But another thing I've seen about people is the type of people that we like that have that independence and that drive, and that they don't like to be constrained, right? They don't like to feel like someone else is making all their decisions, or that they're, there's all this red tape they have to cut through to get things done. They want to be free to go contribute and go deliver value, and so create a culture that supports that.
Didn't you guys use OKRs in here? Yeah. So I say another lesson learned with OKRs.
What's an OKR?
OKR is like, well, we had them on quarterly goals, but they're 0.3, 0.7, 1. So you set yourself a goal, 0.7, you should meet it. 0.3 is like
KPIs?
Yeah, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So you're right, it should be.
Objectives and key results and stuff.
Yeah, so
Oh,
it's,
sorry.
right.
Yeah.
Your technical success is if you get 70% of the way there. If
Yeah.
you assume you can't hit
yeah.
Right.
your stretch, you set a stretch goal.
So I hate process, really. Like, I'm somebody who hates that stuff. But I will say, I think they would have been valuable in R&D, but we always set technical goals. I really wish that we had set goals of like revenue or customer count or something along those lines, as opposed to, have database done by X. I guess it just didn't translate. Our OKRs never translated into value. So that's another lesson.
Yeah, I
Learn
mean, they're
from that.
incremental steps, right? They measure progress, but they're not, like, the goals should be things that yield value, right?
I think it just gave, and again, to be frank here, gave engineering management, and maybe management in general, some good things or some feel goods, right, out there. But they just never, like I said, they never translated well into value and shipping product or anything like that. I don't know why.
What else would I not do? Don't build a direct sales channel unless you have to. They're really expensive. They're, again, really valuable, but if you don't have to do it, don't do it, because it's really, really expensive. Again, it depends on your business, right? I'm not saying this is like a binary thing, but if you can sell through partners, if you can distribute through partners, you can get huge leverage. I mean, I look at companies like Atlassian, and I think here's a $60+ billion organization who, to my knowledge, doesn't have more than about a handful of direct sellers. I don't even know if they have that many. Our cost of sale is tremendous in SaaS. I mean, you're flying people all around the place. I mean, I don't know all the constituencies that are represented here today, but companies like Workday, like Blackbaud, like Benefit Focus, those companies, they feel that pain just like we do, because we're all about the same size. And flying bodies around the country, you get an accumulated cost on a sale of $10,000 pretty quickly, and then you got to make that up. So again, just be thoughtful about whether or not you need that or don't. Let's see, what's another?
I got one. Don't get lured into using very early stage technical implementations, like new programming
Also very
languages,
good,
or
Bleeding edge stuff?
yeah, the bleeding edge might be really cool to work with, but one, it's hard to hire talent that has experience with that bleeding edge, and two, it's hard to maintain that because there's not a lot of documentation out there and support out there. You can't call up Microsoft and have them support your SQL Server if you're making your own database or using some bleeding edge database, right? That was just made 2 days ago. And the third reason is, I had the third reason. It was, you yourselves have to maintain it if support for that bleeding edge product or implementation doesn't catch on, right? Like, if you guess wrong on which bleeding edge was going to win, you're stuck with that if you built a lot on it.
Whose fault was that? Was it the companies who basically to attract the employees said, oh yeah, you can work in this stuff, or was the employees who drove it?
I was just about to bring this up. Microservices are great, and I love it, right? And
With constraints.
It gives people ownership, but you have to put some constraints on that. You have to say, you have to use this language or this language. You have to use only commercially available products that are hosted by Amazon or Google or whatever cloud you're in, and you have to use this tooling. We went microservices and said every team owns their stuff, and because you own your stuff, you're free to do whatever, which is great. So people are writing Go, C#, Java, Clojure, Python, and now you can't move people between teams, right? So I mean, C# to Java, that's not too bad. C# to Clojure, I'm like, oh my God, like
That's
you
big.
can't do that. You can't hire for closure. And the tooling, right? So we have security tooling that does static code analysis, right? Now that tooling has to work with C#, Java, all those languages I just listed. It just doesn't work. But that was part of the whole, we'll let people do what they want because they're smart. And well, okay, but give them some constraints. They can live within that, right? They'll find a way to live with Java.
And people say we hate process, but we enjoy process that makes sense, right? Having some consistency or across teams, and having process that gives you value, the shared services, the shared knowledge that having common languages platforms gives you. So we do care about process. We just care about a different kind of process, not necessarily
Well,
meetings.
it's probably from experience and from the teams up, not something pushed down for the sake of process, right?
Yeah.
It's
That's
better
right.
accepted when there's a reason we can't do this again, let's make this better.
Agreed.
Actually, management, I think, has been the biggest. If you talk to the engineers, they say this all makes sense. It's management that's been reluctant to change.
That's where your business and technical cross, and your masses or your folks that your ranks, right? You're letting them know, hey, this is a great idea. It's a really cool technology, but the whole open source component, I'll never recommend an open source product that I can't give to an intern and have it set up in 4 or 5 hours and functioning.
Yep.
Because I know it's not supportable if I leave or if I walk away from the customer.
Yep. Or if you lose other members of the team or somebody. I can't say you hit by a bus anymore. Say win the lottery. They win the lottery.
Was that 4?
What's that?
I think that
That
was
was a lot.
4.
We
Okay,
have a
so the
lot
5th
of
will be
problems.
quick because this is just an extension of the 4th. Is in a kind of a similar vein. Don't expand geographically unless absolutely necessary either. I don't think because early in a similar way that we wanted to, again, just the culture of our company. We wanted to make sure that everybody had the best environment to work in, and so sometimes you make decisions to let people work in different locations. And then you end up with offices in those locations, and then you end up with very geographically disparate teams. And man, being in a room together is irreplaceable, right? I mean, it's great. There's all these digital meeting technologies and things like that. They do not replace, walking across the room and throwing some stuff on a whiteboard and solving a problem in 10 seconds, right? So keep everybody co-located as long as you can because it's so much easier to maintain your culture and maintain that connectivity if you are co-located.
Thanks for doing this today. I think it was insightful. For everybody here, Will and Dustin, Patrick.
Yep.
In
And
the
Chris.
building, basically Chris. So if you've got some questions on that kind of thing, I'm sure they're happy to basically speak to you on some of these challenges and that kind of thing. And that's what we want to do basically. Where we're heading from an ecosystem. We're consolidating from 2 buildings into one. Consolidating from 18,000 to 15,000, then 50,000 to 90,000. So the idea is basically there's a lot of brain power in that building, and feel free to use it. I know they've been very gracious. From my standpoint, I take issue with the last point because we'll strategically, basically, I want more Workivas. I want more publicly traded companies, national companies in Charleston because this level of talent is hard to come by.
I broke my own rule, but there's a really good reason for it. So I'll caveat that. That might seem contradictory. I promise it's not.
But I think
A deeper strategy
I
there.
would argue basically, actually I would argue, and there's precedent here because essentially what I did was I convinced Joe Riley to let me break off from the city structure of 1,700 employees that formed the CDC and sort of isolated my risk away from the parents so they didn't, being that it was politically in the community. In the political environment, you can't put any risk on the city. They just don't like it.
Yep.
So it worked. We absorbed all the risk, and so what I like is the fact that you're all focused on adding to the parent. So what I convinced the mayor is I'll add to the bottom line,
Yep.
but just separate me from the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So essentially, I hear you guys saying the same thing in a way.
It's what our team is.
We put this team together, and you've got a business and technical team. You're leading the business side of the tech,
Yeah.
the working hand in glove. So. Well, I appreciate all of you coming out. This is a little different, and I want to do more of this with other companies, kind of understand their struggles and what I wouldn't do and what you should do and that kind of thing. But more importantly, that these guys are in the community, so just ping us if you need these kind of resources.
I was going to say too. I mean, Ernest has my contact info. He has Dustin's contact info. We love talking tech. I mean, this is what we do, and we love it. So I think we're happy to talk to anybody. And frankly, all of these things are very context specific. So if there's anything context specific that you want to talk about, I think both of us would.
And I'll also tell you this,
Be happy to do that.
we'll be there in December, so, and someone will invite all you guys to come out. But in our new location, one of the things that's on the calendar right now is a semi-annual group just for the technical folks to come out. So it'd be a presentation, it's an evening thing, basically, so from 5:30 to 7, over a topic, basically, and then we're across the hall from Seoul. So, kind of have drinks and happy hour after that. We're working through details of them so we can get more of the community together. So the idea basically is twice a year we'll do business and technical topics completely different, and you hear this hear this from experts, and why would you do this, why would you not do this, that kind of thing. But we're not going to commingle the audiences, because I think the technical folks, what I've seen is they really like to get together, just have a technical power, and the business folks like the business power. So we'll be doing more of that, and then so I appreciate you coming out, and if you don't think this is better and you want more of this, maybe one a quarter. Somebody who's onto something, just come and what they're learning, and that kind of thing. So just keep that feedback coming, because we're really reflecting on what you guys want, not what we think is best. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks.
Sure, thanks guys.